Attempting to recover after a kind of mixed attempt at a prequel trilogy, Alien is back, bringing the most loved aspects of the original movies and some new faces to bring some fresh blood to try living up to the legacy. Alien Romulus presents itself as a monstrously good blockbuster for the summer, but what makes it so good? When you think about the Alien franchise, probably the first thought that comes to your mind is scary. It's all about the scares. The franchise was built on horror, a cramped spaceship with nowhere to go in the vast void of space, being chased by a creature with the sole purpose of killing you or using you to make more of itself. What isn't scary about that? And for a while, that's how the Alien franchise went. It was still following that idea. They were meant to be scary. They reflected some aspects about the world we live in, the hot-headedness of misunderstandings, motherliness, coming together for the greater good to overcome something terrible. These aspects made the original Alien movies timeless classics. It's why we all enjoy them and why they're still kind of being ripped off even by their own franchise today. They are just that good. So the reason why it's one of my favorite horror franchises, because it's just amazing. However, not too long ago, a sort of prequel trilogy for the franchise was trying to get put in place with the movies Prometheus and Alien Covenant. And while I didn't mind these movies, in fact, I thought some of them were kind of interesting, they weren't the best. Overall, they couldn't really catch on and became more action movies rather than horror movies like the franchise was based on.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
Romulus, however, is definitely a different story, using the director for some incredible modern horror movies such as Don't Breathe and 2013's Evil Dead. Fede Alvarez kind of brought the franchise back to its roots, capitalizing on like the claustrophobia of being trapped with the xenomorph. They have a lot more horror elements. The sound kind of cuts out. They have to be quiet a lot of time and sneak around to get around the aliens like the face huggers, and have to find more clever ways to deal with the horror and how to amp up the horror in the movie. They did quite a good job of bringing the horror back to the Alien franchise. Like, I don't mind having a little bit of action in a horror film, but that should not be the main thing. It should be the scares and having to survive the scares that drives the Alien franchise, of which Romulus, I think, did a pretty good job. And to some, it may feel like a bit of a copy of the originals, and I can understand that concern, and some parts do kind of feel like that. They even tie back into some things from Alien and Aliens and will sometimes almost use exact lines. And I don't think that's really too bad. They're not doing it as like a one-for-one copy, so I'm not too worried about that. Overall, it does a great job of making its self-contained story its own, and that allows for some new growth in the franchise and brings some fresh faces into the mix. To keep a franchise running over and over, you need characters that people can latch on to. And in Alien's case, people that are going to freaking make it out alive so that you actually care about their story as they continue going. And for the first 3 movies, that was Ellen Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver. She was the piece that held the puzzle together. She survived the first encounter with the aliens. She risked her life for a child in the second with her expertise, and she sacrificed herself to prevent a new queen from hatching in the third movie. I have not seen Resurrection, so we'll kind of just ignore what happens there. Now, to continue or reboot the franchise, you need new characters for people to connect with. And because they're not the old characters, you're going to have to work a little bit harder. And once again, in Alien's case, they need to make it out alive. And the problem with the prequel series is that that character was an android that kept living, which David, as a character, that was the android's name, he was pretty interesting, and I kind of liked how he was being utilized, but it wasn't enough to really hold up the entire prequels. So it's why it kind of falls flat. The human crews would die, and that means we only get this synthetic.
I prefer the term artificial person myself.
Artificial person that doesn't even have true emotion. Like, they try and give him real emotions, but you know that he's artificial, and so they're not going to be real, and so we can't share true empathy with his character, and so it's harder to follow along. Alien Romulus both does and doesn't fix this at the same time. Some of the characters you already know are not going to make it out alive. You are kind of almost hoping for it. You're like, well, I hope this is going to be fun watching them die. And when they do, you are not surprised, even remotely. Two characters, though, the main two, Rain and Andy, are the two you're going to be rooting for. And they're pretty great. I love their chemistry on screen. Both actors are doing a phenomenal job, and they actually make you care about who they are. And spoiler warning for those who haven't seen it, it seems like they took the droid idea from the previous two movies and actually kind of made it worthwhile, because Andy is like the adopted brother of Rain, but he's an android. So he isn't really her brother, but she's grown up with him, and he feels real to her, and she's taking care of him like a brother pretty much all her life. And they want to get off this garbage dump planet where they have to work in mines and in terrible conditions, and they never see the light. It sucks. And they want to make it to a better one. I can't remember the exact name of the planet. And by the end, even though synthetics aren't allowed on this new planet, Rain doesn't care. She's going to bring Andy despite what anybody else is going to say. These are the kind of characters that you root for in a horror movie. They care about each other. They establish early on their relationship, and you can relate with that. If you have siblings, you may connect with how they care for each other, or we're like a close friend, being able to care for each other, and you want each other to make it out alive. And that, seeing that as an audience is great, because that means you want to see them make it out alive. So I think that is fantastic that they were able to do that. And even though like they're pretty good friends, and Andy being artificial, you're kind of almost like, this might be where we get kind of a sacrifice play going on. But you know, who knows if you haven't seen the movie. But this is where Romulus took a kind of better turn than its most recent predecessors that kind of wanted to make it a big CGI spectacle, rather than taking the time to make you care about the characters and have them feel real in their story. You actually want to connect with what you're watching and not just be watching something mindless. I love to talk about practical effects on the show. It is no mystery. It's like one of my favorite things in movies, especially just pertaining to some of these older reboots that like bring things back. And I kind of like that. I think it's great that they use the practical effects, because in the originals, practical effects is what gave those movies their charm and gave the appearance of a monster really being on set, interacting with the characters. It just makes it feel more real. Even if in some cases it doesn't always look real, it gives the illusion of feeling more real. Even though like some CGI today is almost indistinguishable from reality. Something about practicals just feels so good. So to have a movie like Romulus that blends them together in such like a seamless way, like half the time you can't even tell when they're different. They just tried to use practicals as much as possible when it was in camera, because it just makes it more believable. They tried not to use green screens as much, so they weren't rotoscoping things, and I think that's great. You want to just be able to do it as much as possible. And really, for this franchise, as long as it doesn't look like Alien 3, I think we're doing pretty good when it's CGI. And major props to the VFX team, because, they must have been working overtime, because it was so good. Because the parts that are CGI, with one exception, always seems to match the practicals pretty much exact. Like half the time, I cannot tell which bits are CGI and which parts aren't. There are some circumstances where you're like, oh yeah, that was done with CGI, because that's not physically possible to recreate in real life. But for the most part, they look pretty good, and it's hard to tell which is which most of the time. And I think that's a sign of a pretty good movie, because they use that to sell the illusion of the aliens, and it makes you feel more immersed, and it doesn't really take you out of the movie. But like I said, there is one exception. And if you haven't seen it, once again, spoiler warning. Near the end of the movie, a new kind of xenomorph variant appears, and it looks the most out of place in the movie. And it's just way more obvious that it's CGI than anything else, and it kind of takes you out of it. I think it's kind of hard to figure out exactly why. I think because it looks too close to human, and because the color of the creature is white, and that usually makes it harder to disguise what is CGI or not. Tactic that's often used, especially if the movie has a bit of a lower budget, they will put things in darkness so that any flaws in the CGI, it's harder to see. But this creature is not dark, so it's really easy to kind of see the flaws, and it just takes you out of the movie. Thankfully, it is at the end, so it doesn't really get shown all that much, so it's less distracting, but it is pretty obvious when it comes up. You're like, oh, that is not real. I remember looking up some, I think, behind the scenes stuff on like how they did it, and they were using like a basketball player to do the creature in kind of a mix of practical and CGI, but it ends up looking like CGI kind of took the forefront, which doesn't look as great. But the VFX team did a great job with the other aliens, so I can kind of forgive that for the most part. Otherwise, though, I think this film does a pretty great job at immersing you in the film. It makes you feel like you're part of it. The scares feel real, even though I'm going to be honest, most of the time the scares weren't getting me, just because I feel like I watch a lot of horror movies, so it kind of prepares me. But there was one with the new variant at the end of the movie that did get me. It made me jump genuinely, and I was like, oh my goodness, scared me. But overall, still pretty good, pretty scary. And there are some minor flaws, like I said, the CGI a little bit. Not all the characters are really that interesting. Some stupid decisions that get made by the characters, some of them excusable, some of them kind of not. You're like, dude, just run. And the story not always being completely concrete, but for the most part, it was not bad. Overall, Romulus is a worthwhile sequel that brings fresh blood and old monsters. And now it's time for our rating, because, we have our own rating scale. From least to worst, it goes garbage, once is fine, right mood, quotable, go to, and all day, every day. And I'm putting Alien Romulus, I'm going to say, at right mood. Not necessarily because I don't like it. In fact, I definitely liked it. But of the Alien franchise, I am almost always going to watch the first two every time. And I'm most likely only going to be watching this one again when I am watching the other movies. Like, it's pretty good, but I'm probably not always going to watch it by itself. However, I do think its story stands alone pretty good within the franchise. You can watch them all together, or you could watch that one by itself. But of the Aliens franchise, I would be watching the first two because they're just that good. So that's why I have put it at right mood. And we have our question of the week, designed to get you interested in the conversation so you can respond in the comments on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, wherever. We want to know, what is your favorite movie Alien? And it's kind of a toss-up for me because I love the xenomorphs, especially because of their practicality. I think the suit looks fantastic. I just love the biology that kind of goes into it, like the parasitic type stuff, which I think is just fascinating, and it's like inspired by like parasitic wasps and stuff. And I think that's interesting that they do that, and they just used a lot of detail to make that happen. So I really like that. But I also really love the Death Angels from A Quiet Place. I just think they're interesting. They're super powerful, and you have to really figure out how to get around them because it's almost impossible to be quiet. Hence why I think They are just so cool. So let us know, what is your favorite movie Alien? And that is it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed us talking about Alien Romulus on Easily Entertained today. Give us a like, give us a follow, so that you can be notified of all the latest episodes. And until next time, bye!